Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I call the House to order. Obviously, a very ordered House anyway. And I call on the Record Secretary to read the minutes of the last public business meeting.
The last public business meeting of the College of Strategists was held on the 14th of March 2018 with Jean Atchison in the chair, in which the motion "This House believes that the West has failed the developing world" was debated. Now, I realised that during these minutes I could talk about last week's debate. I mean, I could, but I really thought, considering a lot of our guests tonight wouldn't have had the opportunity to go to last week's debate, it made sense to have a flick through some of the old motions debated by the list in the past. So I thought I'd look at some of these. So we had "This House dreads a Russian victory." That was an interesting one. "This House would welcome an Irish monarchy."
I'm available. And I am a queen.
"This House believes that the Senate should be abolished." Of course, tonight we're talking about the trolley problem. A classic dilemma in which, there's a trolley and it's on a railway and its tracks are headed for 5 strangers, and you, a bystander, you have the option to divert it towards one person. And obviously, that is a massive moral quandary. But really, the trolley problem I have with that is, that's not a trolley, that's a train! It's a train problem. Call it what it is, but sorry, I suppose I am getting off track. Anyhow, let's go full steam ahead with this. Sorry, I confess, I went a bit off the rails there. You would think at the second last public business meeting of the 248th session that they would have trained me by now. I'm afraid that is not the case, but I suppose we can all enjoy this debate tonight and get trolleyed at the reception after. And with that, the meeting adjourned.
Ladies and gentlemen, are there any objections to my signing these non-minutes? There being no objections to something that couldn't be objected to, sorry, I've been trying for about 15 years to get the Record Secretaries to write minutes. So, I would now like to call the Auditor to introduce the invited guests. Zeke.
Hi everybody. So our chair for tonight's debate is Professor David McConnell. He is the 58th Pro-Chancellor of the University and also the President of the HIST. Chairing the judging panel is Honorary Member Adrian Langan, accompanied by 2 student judges, Julie Davis and Katrina Newbreen, and 2 more honorary members, Will Dunn and Andrew Blennerhassett. On proposition tonight, we have an entirely honorary member crew, including Oscar Dewey, who is an ex-MC of the 243rd session and an ex-treasurer of the 245th session, and a silver medalist of the Society. We have... Everyone gets a clap, it's going to take a while, but it's fine, we've got time. We have Ross Hinds, who is an ex-librarian of the 197th session of the Society and a silver medalist of the Society. We have Lorna Staines, who is ex-SMC of the 246th session and a silver medalist of the Society. And we have John Smith, ex-auditor of the 223rd session and silver medalist of the Society. And then on opposition, we have Senator David Norris, who is the Vice President of the HIST. So the standing orders for this evening are that speeches will be 7 minutes in length. The first and last minute are protected time, so after the first minute you'll hear a little ding like this. And after that you can give POIs as much or as little as you please. And after the 6th minute you'll hear a ding like this. And then the time for POIs will be finished. And then after the 7th minute you'll hear 2 dings like this. And that means the speaker has to shut up. Okay, and everyone, please fill out your oratory returns and find them on your seat, and they help us to give prizes to the best speakers in the Society. Thank you very much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, the motion before the House tonight is the trolley problem. That this House would pull the lever, and I invite Oscar Tui, and remember to propose the motion.
It's fine, they can't see it on the live stream.
I can change it if you want.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having me back here. It's great to be here again, and I'm very happy to give you the opening speech for the proposition. The problem I have here tonight, ladies and gentlemen, is I did not realise that this was a competitive event where there would be judges judging me and what they were going to say. As a result of which, what follows from now on will not be necessarily the most constructive, but I do think we can all agree will be the winning speech for this competition. So, this House pull the lever is such a broad and vague topic that I thought that, you know what, Catherine Kelly really gave me the opportunity to define this motion however I wanted. I know what she was going for. But in reality, there's nothing to stop me defining it however I want, as broadly or smallly as I want. I could instead, define the train conductor as Nigel Farage, and the people on the tracks as Paul's political dream. I could instead make some sort of silly joke about pull the lever and make the obvious dick joke. I can then remind everyone that I won a silver medal for this event. Ladies and gentlemen, I have 3 points which I'm going to bring to you today, apparently. The first one of those is personal responsibility, because I am going to talk about the trolley problem, because as much as I would like to derail things, Catherine, I think it's only fair to give everyone else a chance. So, personal responsibility. Second of all, why humanity is good and great and we need to preserve it. And the third point, which we're going to entitle my mystery point, which we'll see what will happen when we get to 5 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, personal responsibility. This is a deeply important motion that affects a lot of people, specifically Lewis drivers, who go through life every day without the opportunity to fulfill this one dream, this one goal. Because if I was a Lewis driver, this is all I would think about. Day in and day out, what will happen one day there are 5 people on the track in front of me? As a choice and as a job, this sounds perfect to me. And I think it would be my responsibility, if I was put in this position, to take that choice, to make that chance. And the reason I think it's that responsibility, and the reason I think it's responsible for him to do so, and indeed anyone to do so, is because that would get you on reeling in the years. Right? It's been a dream of mine to get on reeling in the years, and there's only like 2 years left before they make the next series of it. So I have to come up with something. So the best possible plan at this point is to design a trolley problem, become a Lewis driver, and as a result I can do it. So what does this have to do with the so-called point of personal responsibility? Well, it's the fact that no one has ever actually gotten anywhere without being personally responsible, without making that brave decision, without pulling that lever, without changing that track, regardless of the consequences. Because I think that that's important. Because what's ultimately at stake here when you pull that lever is a choice about your own fate and your own destiny. It's not really about the other people on the track, because let's face it, no one really cares about them. What's really important here is what I get to do with this moment at this point in time in my life. Will is scratching his nose in a beleaguered fashion. But I think that this is important, and Catherine agrees. What do you think?
As millennials, are we not all really afraid of choosing our own destiny?
Which is why it's important that we do it, Catherine. Seize the day, seize the lever, crush the innocent bystanders. My second point is entitled, Humanity is Good, which I wrote as my second point, as a headline, and then struggled to find reasons why humanity was good. Which I acknowledge is what makes humanity great, and therefore, me the winner of this debate. The fact is that we all have an obligation to minimize harm where we see it in the world. And the reason we have an obligation to minimize harm as we see it in the world is because that's the only thing that we can possibly do. You can argue about whether or not it's the correct decision, and indeed that's what people are probably going to do tonight if they're going to have less fun than me, I suppose. But the fact is that at the end of the day, we all have to make decisions, and when we make those decisions, we always do so believing that we are doing so in the best interests of the people around us, in the best interests of society around us. And I think that that's the only way that we can look at society, and the only way that we can... Yeah, sure, brother.
If we have an obligation to help everyone around us, why are you here waffling away rather than playing out to some developing country to help out there?
Because that's scary. I mean, that's really, really scary as a concept. I don't want to do that. I work in funds, and that's nice and safe. I sit at a desk all day, and it's very comfortable. It brings me, ladies and gentlemen, to the 5-minute mark, the mystery point. Which is, to be honest, I kind of want to kill someone. Like the thrill of killing another human being. There's got to be something to that, right? Lots of people in the past have done it before. Some of them seem to get something out of it. So I don't see why it's a bad idea. Why shouldn't we do so? No, thank you, Catherine. What are you doing here? I'm trying to win a debate. It's important that we make decisions that are in the best interests of us and of society. And if someone is willing to let me pull a lever and kill them, I'm all ears. So, here's why I think that this is important. Doing this right now, it's cheaper than therapy. So, I can sit here and I can talk about whatever nonsense I need. Ooh, goody, I'm at 6 minutes already. Ladies and gentlemen, personal responsibility and the ability to do the least harm possible is all that we can do for society. As a result of which, I don't want to derail this debate anymore. I don't want to get us any further off track. I wasn't even trying there. It's just so stupid. I think that there's only one thing that we can do as a society. And that's count the seconds till it's all over. Count with me, ladies and gentlemen. 15. 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you.
Call upon Ronan McGilla Rua, ex-auditor, to oppose the motion.
Each year, over 300,000 children die from malaria.
And he's responsible. You shit! You pulled the lever!
I don't think you should be laughing, like, genuinely. That's a fact, like. And their deaths that could have easily been prevented simply by owning a mosquito net. Now, it costs roughly €5 to buy and to deliver a mosquito net to a child in need. So essentially, for the price of a pint, you can save a kid's life. Alternatively, you could come out with us to Workman's tonight and have your fill of Red Rooms and Black Russians, all at €4 a pop, and by the logic of proposition, essentially sentence some poor kid to death for each one that you drink.
Hear, hear.
Because the logic of proposition is that inaction is just as bad as action. That the inaction of allowing 5 people to die is worse than the action of killing 1. That the inaction of not buying mosquito nets for those kids who need it is worse than the action of just, shooting one of those kids in the face. And on opposition tonight, we want to prove to you that action is worse than inaction. That sometimes it is better to let fate take its course rather than to be judge, jury, and executioner. Now, by this point, some of you may be wondering, when is he going to start talking about the trolleys? And yeah, Ronan, I came here to listen to trolleys and levers and stuff. And sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not really going to talk about trolleys, because I think it's quite easy to just stand in this comfy chamber and like talk in some abstract about pulling levers and not really ground the debate in any sort of reality. So instead, I'm going to focus on some more real-world examples, potentially some more real-world examples, but who knows if they actually will be. But before I do, though, I just want to definitively answer the trolley problem, because it does have quite an easy solution. Now, some people think the solution is to wait until the first set of wheels are past the junction and then pull the lever, thereby engaging multi-track drifting, killing all 6 people. But I'm not Oscar, so I don't think that's the best way. If you actually think about it, like, I can't decide what I want for lunch most days. Like, do I want a burrito? Do I want a sandwich? Do I want soup? Do I want to mix it up a bit and maybe get a salad? Like,
Point of information, maybe you should just buy a malaria net for somebody.
It's not wrong. But faced with the trolley problem in real life, like, I guarantee you most people's thought process is going to go something along the lines of, oh no, a trolley's coming. Oh, do I pull the lever? Oh, should I save 1 or kill 5? Or is inaction worse than action? Oh, why did I leave the immersion on this morning? Oh, why am I thinking about the immersion? Oh no, it's too late. Like, the indecisiveness of humanity means in that split second that you have the choice of pulling the lever or not, you're probably just going to spend so long thinking about it, you're not going to do it. So in reality, no one pulls the lever. But suppose that you do actually have enough time to make your decision. I guess that's why we're having this debate now. Let's talk about what you should think about. And like, in case I haven't said the words, inaction isn't as bad as action enough, I'm going to illustrate it with an example. And it's an example I plagiarized from the Netflix show The Good Place, because like most millennials, I go to Netflix for deep, meaningful, philosophical discussions. So, consider you're a debater, and you have 5 patients. A doctor. Sorry. Nerd. So, consider you're a doctor, and you have 5 patients in one room, each requiring some different organ transplant in order to survive and stay living. In the other room, you have some poor some poor patient, who just happens to be a match for an organ transplant for each of those 5 other individuals. What do you do in this situation? Do you leave it and let fate take its course and those 5 people die, or do you go into the room, kill this poor unsuspecting man, harvest the organs from his just recently dead body and save the lives of 5 others? It's a lot harder of a decision to make, isn't it? But it's essentially the same one. You're still just deciding to kill one person in order to save the lives of 5 others. The reason that this one is a lot harder to make is because now it feels a lot more real than simply pulling or pushing a lever. And the reason it's harder to do is because we recognize that there is some difference between the inaction of allowing those people to die rather than the action of going and killing that one person in order to save the others. But further to that, when you intervene, you're making some value judgment about people's lives. And quantifying life is something that's notoriously difficult to do, because life is something that we value above all else. If you ask someone to try and quantify life, unless they're an economist, they're probably not going to give you a good answer. Life is something that's life is something that's infinitely valuable. And as a mathematician, the thing about infinity is that it starts to get really weird when you go to do addition and deletion. So 5 times infinity is still just infinity. Now maybe there was more to that point, or maybe it was just an attempt by me to get my degree into a debate for the first time in 5 years. But I do think there is something very immoral about deciding some lives are more important than others and taking action to that effect. And if you actually look now at the real world examples where this kind of thinking is actually used, it's every time the US or the UK or whatever superpower decide to invade some country or overthrow some democratic leader, the logic is always, we must intervene. We cannot stand idly by as this country tears themselves apart. And in almost every case, they make things worse off, whether in Latin America or the Middle East. In the real world, the people who pull the lever are blinded by their ignorance and arrogance. Do not be those people. Now look, at the end of the day, if you genuinely want to side with Proposition tonight, then by all means, pull out your phone and donate to Against Malaria and save some kid's life. Without that though, you're just another hypocrite. Thank you.
I now call upon Ross Hines to support the motion.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen. It seems to me that the problem with the problem is that it's all certain. Everything is clear. We know that the 5 people are definitely going to get killed, or one person is going to get killed. Real life is not like that. You never know what's going to happen. That 100%. There's always, and I'm going to give you some examples from my experience of where what you might have thought was the case wasn't actually the case. And the place I want to start is with Hans Christian Andersen. Now, I don't know about whether you've all studied your fairy tales or not, but I'm going to tell you about these 2 tailors, and they were in a country, kingdom, empire, which had a king, an emperor, who was very keen on sartorial elegance, and they saw an opportunity. They said, they went to the king and said, "We have the most fabulous outfit we can make for you, fitting perfectly, and everyone will be jealous." So he said, "Fine, just the job." And they said, "It's very expensive." He said, "No problem." So they came for the fitting, and they had the new suit on hangers, and the problem for the emperor was he couldn't see very much, and they explained to him that for people of very high intelligence, they would be able to see this magnificent suit. People who were stupid wouldn't see anything at all. Naturally, and people who were in the wrong position and shouldn't be in their job, they wouldn't see anything either. Now, the emperor couldn't admit that he was in the wrong job, and he certainly felt that he had to be able to see it. So you all know what happened. They went away and they made all the adjustments to the new outfit, came to the king and put it on. And the king explained to all his courtiers that only people with high intelligence who were suited to their position could see the magnificent outfit he had on. He actually didn't have anything on, but, and he walked through the town, and everybody knew that people of high intelligence would be able to see this magnificent suit, and people who were in the right job would be able to see it. And everybody knew that except a 3-year-old little boy who said, "But the emperor has no clothes." And he was the one who told it how it really was. And I want to give you a few examples of, in my experience, or of my knowledge, where this happened. And the first one, which Senator Norris will know about, was, some of you may not be old enough to know about the so-called bugging of the Garda Síochána Ombudsman Commission. This was and it's very relevant because it was a London consultancy company, supposedly expert in network security and so on. And they gave a report which said that there had been a UK mobile phone system detected, and only the Gardaí could have done that. Now, anyone who had worked in the industry would know that there is only one Irish mobile network, and that's run by what used to be Telecom Éireann, then became Eircom, and is now Air. All the others, and there were 3 more at the time, are run by multinational companies using software. O2 was based in Spain, Vodafone in London, and 3 in Hong Kong. So there was only one Irish company, and naturally the other 3 did their experiments here. So it turned out that the emperor had no clothes because the report was a load of rubbish. Not a single thing it said was correct. And so here was an example where, as a consequence of that, the minister had to resign, the commissioner had to resign, and all because they believed a report by an expert based in London, none of which was true. So that's an example of where you can see something happen which is very serious. And what I'm suggesting is that everybody should make their own assessment of the situation. So as the trolley is coming down, you don't believe the people who tell you that there are 5 people there and they will definitely be killed if you don't do something. And there's one other poor individual on the other side, and that he might get killed as well. There may be lots of things you don't know which will mean that they will not be killed. Let me give you another example, which our chairman was involved in. He's a bit apprehensive now, what am I going to say? He and I served on the board of a hospital at one stage, and we had discussions with the Department of Health about how this hospital would be run and moved and amalgamated. And the chairman, our president, had left the country and gone to Thailand, I think. And I was the vice chairman, and I got a letter from the secretary of the Department of Health to tell me that the hospital must, within a few weeks, amalgamate with 2 other hospitals, and they wouldn't take no for an answer. I took this document to the board of the hospital, and I explained that we'd received this, and it was an ultimatum. And everybody said, oh, well, we have to do what the minister said, because in the letter it said, if you don't do what I say, I will have to take this to the government. And this was a big threat for this board. However, if you were the small boy and you worked in the civil service as I did, I pointed out that this was not the case at all. A minister who threatened to go to the government must have a very weak position, because no minister with a strong position would ever do that. And therefore, I wrote back a letter to say, we fully agree with all your objectives, but of course you're not very serious about this and that and the other. So an example of where it had appeared that the 5 people and the 1 person were about to be killed, but in fact this was not the case at all. And I had another one. I know there are lots of barristers here today, so I hope you bear with me as I describe my experience.
There aren't lots of anybody here. There's a very small crowd. It's hardly worth coming.
Another example of where something happened, and you could say, like the small boy. I had been working on Post, and we had a court case which was heading for the High Court and the Supreme Court. And we had an eminent senior counsel's opinion on what we ought to do. And I was a member of the executive committee, and my colleagues all agreed that we should do what the council said, because you always do what the council say. And it seemed to me obvious that we should do the opposite of what the council said. But they wanted a unanimous decision, and I wasn't agreeing. So I said, no, I can't agree. I think it's completely wrong. So I was told to write my opinion down, and then our solicitor would pass the gist of that on to the council. But unfortunately, I discovered it didn't work like that. Our solicitor passed my rather brutal and frank comments on to the council. And everybody, my colleagues were all delighted about that, and they thought that Heinz will get his comeuppance at last. But what came back was a small note on the top of the memo saying, I agree with Mr. Heinz. So this council was, again, a case where one person, and this is my point, one person taking a different view can make a big difference. And what I'm saying to you is you need to make your own assessment of each situation, and you mustn't believe what you are told, because it may not be the case. And that allows me to say that it doesn't much matter what you do with the lever, but it's better to do something than not to do something, despite what the opposition might say. And therefore, you should pull the lever.
Heard Ross Hines tell a story about me, and I'm much more worried about the next speaker, Senator David Norris, who might follow his example. In any case, I now call upon him to oppose the motion.
Madam, instant replacement, just add water audit tricks. I understand that there's been a horrendous scandal, and the previous auditor has just pissed off somewhere. I didn't find out whether this was a sexual scandal, which would be absolutely delicious, or merely just a financial one, for which the Hist is renowned throughout 290 years. But I'm a little bit at a loss as to why I'm here. Because although I did join both the Phil and the Hist in the first week of my undergraduate career at Trinity, by the end of that term I'd been kicked out of both of them. I was kicked out of the Phil for refusing to pay a fine that I regarded as completely capricious and nonsensical, and I was kicked out of the Hist for academic nudity. For those of you who don't know, it's not at all as exciting as it sounds. And I have to say, with regard to the Emperor and his new clothes, I sincerely hope he was well endowed, because that would be one hell of a treat. So I really don't know what I'm doing. You know, all this old ballsology about the Lewis, where the hell did that come from? 5 people on a railway track. Anyway, the Lewis is the greatest catastrophe for traffic that this city has ever seen. I mean, it is a complete and utter waste of time. I spent 30 years trying to persuade the city authorities to put in an underground, as they should have done. And I got the late and great Dr. Gareth Fitzgerald to do the arithmetic, and he showed magisterially that a surface tram could not possibly shift sufficient numbers of passengers and would create traffic chaos in the centre of Dublin, because you couldn't extend the length of the tram beyond a certain amount, and you couldn't increase the frequency. Whereas with an underground, you can have 1 tram per minute. And look what the bloody Aegis did. They extended the tram, and they blocked both sides of fucking O'Connell Bridge. So all I can say is, the 5 poor bastards who are tied on the track, wherever they came from, they're perfectly safe. You can pull every lever you want and you won't get anywhere, because the tram is stuck in the middle of O'Connell Bridge. And then there was this stuff about phones. I don't know where the bloody telephones came in, but I'm a kind of technophobe. I have never switched a computer on or off, and I hope to go to my grave a computer virgin. The telephone company telephoned me and said, you are due for an upgrade. Would you like an iPhone? And I said, I don't want an upgrade. Do you do downgrades? And they said, what do you mean? And I said, well, to me, because I'm very old-fashioned, a telephone is an instrument that makes and receives telephone communications. Full stop. I don't want it to tell me the weather in the Arctic, diagnose the state of my bowels, or talk about the fate of the polar bear. I'm not interested.
Bleak on all 3.
What? What's that mean?
Polar bear boils, and if I have to explain it,
maybe you can tell me to booze up afterwards. But in any case, the thing about the Emperor's new clothes, which I did find quite enchanting, I am a monarchist. I really am. And I think the idea of restoring a monarchy to Ireland, I would suggest the O'Connor Don, But if not, somebody could resurrect George III. Because during what misguided people described as his madness, he appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace and he received a rapturous applause from the crowd, upon which he unleashed his trousers and exposed his bare buttocks to the people, which received a further thunderous ovation. And I really would like to see that repeated. But I have to say, in a republic, it wouldn't be quite the same thing.
Perhaps with Meghan, though.
Can you imagine Michael D performing that from Ars on Uachtaráin? I don't really think so. And you see, I actually thought that this was all about the health services. You know, the trolleys. And I could have gingered myself up. Nobody said anything about 5 fucking people on a railway line. There was nothing in the motion about tracks or any of this kind of stuff. So naturally, when you talk to a politician about the trolley problem, people think hospitals. And that's exactly what I thought. And I have to say, I think we have a bloody good health service here. And I can tell you something else. I've been on a trolley. It was very comfortable indeed. The only problem was the noises. You know, it kept me awake all night. I was on it for about 8 or 10 hours. And, but some of the noises were quite entertaining. They brought in at 3 o'clock in the morning a drug addict who somebody had thrown a block of cement on him and broken his foot. But he was put on the next trolley to me, and I heard him say to the doctor, "Hey, doctor, I don't suppose there'll be a chance of a spot of gear in here." You know, it's wonderful, this triumph of the human spirit. Here he was in this ghastly position, and all he wanted was his drugs. You know, it was simply enchanting. But if you look at the situation, I mean, there are several 100,000 missed appointments in hospital. How the hell? Let's have a bit of patient responsibility. You let these bastards turn up for their appointments and stop clogging up, clogging up the system. I've been in hospital a couple of times. The first time was I had a kind of suspected prostate problem, and this surgeon shoved a kind of brush up my flute, and he hadn't disinfected it, so I got septicemia, and I damn nearly died. And they got me into hospital, and I was stuck on a trolley. But I can tell you, if you're at death's door, you're damn glad to be on a trolley. I was simply thrilled to be on a trolley, and the next time I was in hospital, oh yes, I'll come to a finish in a minute. But he went on. He went on forever, and he's a vice president. So I'll take another minute and a half.
He's deaf. You're not.
Oh, I'm completely deaf. I thought you went blind from it, but I went deaf. Anyway. The awful presidential election where they told such shitty lies about me, you know, all the time. It really was pretty ghastly, and I got very aggressive liver cancer from it, and I was whizzed into hospital, and actually it was rather fun. Because first of all, I had an operation to clear away some of the stuff, and I said to the doctor after the surgeon, I said, you know, I thought coming out of that, I probably had about a 30% chance of survival. Oh, he said, if that. And what they do is they shave you, which is quite fun, and then they put you in these kind of frilly knickers. And I was wheeled down on a trolley, and I was lying there with a green sheet on top of me, and they just stuck in the needle with the lovely morphine in it. And the surgeon came along and said, "How are we today?" And I whizzed the green sheet off, and I pointed at the knickers, and I said, "Bloody gorgeous, wouldn't you agree? I put on my frilly knickers just for you." And he said to me afterwards, he said, "You know, we got a lot of well-known people in here, but you're the first one that's exactly the same in real life as you are on TV." My last antidote, as they call them on the north side of Dublin, is about when I was in hospital with the cancer. They gave me a morphine thing. It's wonderful. You know, keep whizzing it, and you go whee. And I was under the influence of morphine, and I whizzed down the corridor like a nymph. And suddenly, this trollop jumped out on top of me and grabbed me. And I said, unhand me, you trollop, how dare you? I'm innocent, I'm an Irish citizen, I wasn't near the bank, it's not my gun, they're not my fingerprints, I demand to be legally represented. What do you think you're doing? And I'd been floating down, you see, with my bum sticking out. And she said, I'm protecting your modesty. And I said, there you are, you see, you're a liar as well as everything else. How can you possibly protect something that has never existed in the first place? I have never been modest.
Senator Norris didn't stay long in the history. He was far too hot for us. Now, Lorna Staines will propose the motion.
I don't know how to rebut that. If the judges choose to change the debate, good for you, fair play, he wins. And I'm also not debating whether David Norris has modesty. That's an op sweep. We're not giving. I will say one thing. If a senator spends 8 to 10 hours in a trolley, I'd say it's not that good health system. We're all going to be outside. So let's talk about what I think this debate should be. I think it is important to note that this debate is not a matter of don't do something, like don't see or don't do something, or action. It is a choice as to whether you choose to make an action or inaction, and it is that choice that we have to decide on today. It is that choice as to whether inaction or action can be damning, and how you weigh up that decision that you decide. I don't have to take Ronan's burden of being like, action is always better. I am going to tell you, 1, that inaction is damning, 2, that action is damning, and 3, try and help you understand how to weigh up these things. I do think before we begin, the last point, one point of extraneous rebuttal, recognise Ronan's points come down to the system, let fate decide. On that metric, you tell the kids with malaria, sorry, let fate decide on that one. It is a crazy case to take on his claim, and not the one he needed to. But it is worth noting that he's also killing kids with malaria. And he said it wasn't funny, but I deeply disagree. Let's talk about 1, why inaction causes consequence, and why that is therefore a responsibility you also bear. So, I think you're all now, about this point, being smug and thinking an example. So I will take the most extreme example you want. I will take from now. You don't move for the rest of your life. At this point, you stay here now forever. That is an utter inaction and a continuum. Recognise those do have consequences. Firstly, you start to upset Jim and Joe, who just want to go home. As you continue on, you confuse the new freshers as to why this statue is just still here, which is not moving and not breathing, but it's just present. And thirdly and finally, you cause us to close the chamber out of sheer awkwardness, that you won't leave for your utter belief in your inaction for the rest of your existence. No. Recognise action, that is an extreme example, but you have caused harm within that. You have disquieted people, and your inaction is utterly something you have chosen to do. Because do recognise that is an important distinction between this. This is not a matter of not knowing what will happen. This is not a matter of not understanding the consequences or being something outside of what you know or understand what will happen. It is a choice you make to not act. It is a choice and a decision you make to not act. And I think that is where it is so significant, and why inaction by choice is always therefore a responsibility of yours, in the same way that an action by choice is always a responsibility. That is why it can happen with harm. So let's look at the real life world of this. Why is it then, if inaction is a choice of inaction is your responsibility, how does that look like harm? That looks like, in the real world, that kid in your class who was quiet, who was on their own, who you didn't speak to because other people didn't speak to. That looks like the homeless people now who literally exist in a world where people actively choose not to see them as they walk down the street. That looks like a person in this room who needs someone to ask them, what's going on, how are you, what is wrong with you? And that looks like you sitting there in that situation when your friends don't ask you that, when they see the distress, when they see you need someone to take a chance from you, and they don't do that. Understand inaction does cause real harm within it. It causes it in the silly extreme examples I give you, and it causes it in the day-to-day, because active choice to not see or not do also damns you within it. That is one side of it. Now let's balance the other. I am willing to say also that action causes a consequence. That makes completely consistent within it. I think the upside aren't challenging it, and Ronan even agrees. It probably is easier to show you. For example, when David Norris and John Smith had a go at Catherine's minutes, that caused her pain, and that had a go at her poor minutes. But sorry, honey, those trolley jokes, oh dear. Also an action also caused pain. But let's take it at the extreme example. You choose to walk anywhere. You're probably going to step on a spider or something. You're probably going to discourage a spider. That is probably pretty terrible for them and their existence and those sort of things. Any action you do causes a consequence. And again, the fact that you've chosen to do it, it is a responsibility onto you because it is your action within it. We think that the choice of action can choose to help people, but it can also harm people. We agree with Ronan when you say that choice to buy a drink or do something for yourself instead of helping others does look like meaningfully harm for you. Look at this, but also recognize even your actions when you try to be positive often also have a negative. If you want an example of this, think of every his scandal you can name. Shockingly, there's always been two sides, and rather unshockingly, both sides always think they are the more correct, and that the other side are just awful, evil, harmful people who, how can't they see the damage they have done? That is on both perspectives, and that's because this is the hard truth about existence, is that there is very few actions you can make that don't also cause harm, even when you choose to do them for a positive. What is important about this is that the choice to either have action or inaction is always, one, your responsibility, but two, will always have some form of consequences, and they are likely to be both good and bad, because there isn't just a definitive, clear path, or we would all be doing this. So then the question becomes, how do you weigh that up? There's two things you need to assess here, and the important thing is to weigh up and assess values. Ronan tries to throw out this nice little wild card thing they do with the trolley problem, where they're like, haha, but what about shooting people in organs? Recognize if you use the trolley problem and ask people would they be willing to push a person in front of a trolley to save 5 people, they also find that harder. That's because we find it disquieting the more action we take within it. But the fact that it is difficult to do does not mean that you shouldn't do it. The fact that it is a harder decision does not mean you should do it. He can't throw this out as a silver bullet, because the reality is the decisions you make in life, are hard. They are things you have to weigh up every day and have to look without it. And all the good action you can do. For example, when we put yes equality and marriage first, we also had to put on the back burner things like adoption rights and trans rights, which are still massively behind the LGBT movement. That was a choice we actively had to make. The abortion rights campaign now has to put things like work pay gaps and the gender equality on the back burner. Choices of good and choices of bad always cause a harm. What we must weigh up then is which causes the least harm to the most good. And in that case, the trolley problem becomes a self-explanatory case. You cannot say that inaction or action does not make you responsible or does not cause a consequence. What you can say is that if you choose to pull the lever, you hurt one person but save 5 people. If you do not, you cause more harm to those people. Ladies and gentlemen, it is not a situation where you can simply raise your hand and say loftily like Ronan does, this is a philosophical thing. All choices are philosophical and they are practical. You are damned if you do and damned if you don't in your very existence, but you must strive to the best you can. You must strive to harm the least, and that is what you should propose.
I call on Catherine Pasifka to oppose the motion, please.
So I think Lorna is correct when she addresses the question and challenges Ronan on the idea, essentially, of whether or not action and inaction are the same thing and how they equate. And whatever, we're happy enough to say that deciding not to act is, in and of itself, a decision. And that's fine. But the motion is, would you, not, do you believe this might be a good thing to do? And I think that we equate action and inaction philosophically, right? But the human mind is very good at playing tricks upon itself. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and that's going to clash nicely with the responsibility point. But first, I have 2 points of extraneous rebuttal, right? To Oscar, he says the thrill of killing one person would be great. Why not kill 5, Oscar? Right? But then, addressing what Lorna just said there, and the idea that actions cause consequences, that's fine. The butterfly effect, flaps its wings, tornado, that kind of thing, right? But also importantly, she says here that even if you try to be positive, sometimes those actions can create a negative reaction, right, and have negative consequences. And you can do what you think is best, but that's still going to end up with a net negative thing to society, right? And there are many ways in which people can look at situations. So I'm going to tell you why it is that humans prioritise selfishness and why we should do that in this situation, because we don't know how our actions are going to affect things. And then finally, on like the least harm versus most good, I'm just going to tell you right now, buckle in for my second point, because it's going to be very exciting, I'm not going to lie. Right, so look a little bit on responsibility and how much we value basically personal deniability in situations when you do that. That's why we have firing squads where we give one random person blanks, right? So that person can live with themselves. They can go home to their family and have that plausible deniability that they did not shoot that person, because we value that. And that's incredibly important. Which is why I'm going to tell you that when I was in first year, my friend Dee, honorary member of the society, linked me a guide to flirting with plausible deniability that has proven incredibly valuable to me. So I'm going to give you some of the advice. It says, keep your coat on during the entire conversation. Hide yourself in an uncharted cave until someone comes looking for you. This way, they'll know you're independent, but not seeing anybody else. Body language is important. Carry an actual shield. Steal something of theirs, then go to the bathroom. Plant it on a mutual friend. Set those two people up with each other. Whisper your feelings into the wedding invitation when you send them your RSVP. Let your hand brush against theirs, then visibly wipe it off on your jeans. Then anonymously pay off their student loans. Right? So this essentially is to prove to you that we value the ability to deny responsibility in all situations. And yes, by the way, I am single. But we need this, right? Because we need to be able to have an action and then move on from it. And pulling the lever may allow you to morally, philosophically, up in your head, be in the clear, right? But you're still going to feel responsible for the death of that person. It is on your hands because you have pulled it. Whereas you can believe that the lives of those five people aren't, right? That if you hadn't come along, they would have died anyway, and that's absolutely fine. And maybe that helps you sleep at night a little bit better, right? And like humans are fundamentally selfish, right? No, thank you, Lorna. We do things to benefit ourselves, like first and foremost, right? And that's why I think that you wouldn't pull the lever, right? Because if you pull that lever, you are responsible. End of, right? The scenario that has been bandied about so far is that like that idea of like killing a healthy person in order to give their organs to 5 dying people, right? But the reason that doesn't feel as easy, right, is because what you have to note here is that essentially the agency of the person that you would be killing and how you need to take that into account, right? There's an idea in the trolley problem essentially that there's a certain amount of inevitability here, right? That they are also tied to the tracks. And hey, you probably have to do some fucked up shit to get tied to tracks in the first place, right? So like, that means you don't think of them as being entirely different than the 5 people that are going to end up dying, right? But they are, right? You don't have to think about their lives because it's just essentially a moral, like philosophical issue, right? But for all you know, they're just laying down, having a nice cup of tea when you come along with a big fuck-off train and kill them, right? But the lack of agency they have there makes it okay, and I don't think that is something that you should consider, right? Like, were you not there, that person was never in any kind of danger, and you may as well push someone in front of the trolley to stop it, right? And that will be essentially that blood on your hands, and you will have to live with doing that situation, and I think that's bad. So, no thank you. I had some stuff here about parallel worlds and strands of history, and no matter what you do, those 5 people end up dying anyway, because time is a circle and we live in a multiverse. And they're probably alive regardless, so long as you look in 4 dimensions, right? But I'm going to leave that for the next debate, and instead I'm decided to talk about the end of the human race, and to live is to suffer. And this is my second point, right? Essentially about when you equate suffering and why it is that we win this side of the debate. Humans have done a lot of terrible shit, okay? We're destroying the planet, we're destroying each other. Inequality is only growing. Who knows how much longer we have in relative to peace before the next world war breaks out. I regret to inform you all that Crocs are still a thing. We made the Emoji movie, right? Things are not looking good for us. And the more people we can like wipe out via trolleys is probably for the better, okay? So essentially, like the more, like I said, no human deserves to live, because to live is to suffer and to inflict constant suffering upon everyone around you all of the time, because we have a net negative contribution to the world. So why bother to save any life at all when the best that they're going to do is prolong the horror of living in the world and the horror that is human interaction? Have you seen memes lately? Right? Once upon a time, there were all lol cats and awkward penguins and that kind of thing. And now, everybody wants to die, right? That is essentially what we have. We understand the suffering, at least on the internet, right? So, pulling the lever is to support the continued survival of the human race, the continued value of human life. This is furthering on from what Ronan brought you, right? Is that once a human life is valued, it allows that hierarchy of value to be constructed with certain humans on top. You value a life, you value 5 lives over the life of one person. And you're buying into that system of inequality in which you get to choose who lives and dies and whose lives are more important. You're being tricked into believing that 5 people don't cause 5 times the amount of suffering to their fellow humans as one person would. You are propping up a system that stratifies society that essentially you justify through the act of ending a human life. In short, that's everything that is wrong with humanity and has created all of these problems that we have. So ultimately, you end up having a higher degree of responsibility, at least in your own head. And not only that, but you are responsible for the suffering of all those people who go on to cause suffering in their lives. And that is sickening. I guess what I say about all this at the end is that we all like to believe that we're the type of person who would be on proposition. That in that split second we can make that call and weigh up every aspect of humanity. The truth is, everyone in here would not pull the lever, because we all would be terrified. Ronan is correct. You wouldn't be able to comprehend what is going on and be able to make those moral decisions. You'd probably just stand there dumbfounded and entirely incapable of making a decision. And that is the problem, because humans in their mind are very different to humans in reality. I beg you to oppose.
We're going to do some floor speeches this evening. We'll do one proper floor speech and one off floor speech. There'll be 4 minutes in length, so if you want to give a floor speech, please let me know.
So at this stage, we still are with the order breaker, and that's why John Smith was wondering whether he was going to be called to propose the motion.
Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen. When it came to writing this speech, I'd still not been told which side of the debate I was supposed to speak on, but with some justification, I reassured myself that it would not matter. Of course, the very recent realisation that the debate is not as focused on the ills of runaway trains, runaway trains, as I had previously thought, has come as something of an embarrassment. I had assumed that as the Society had kindly invited back speakers from previous generations, it had also decided to give us a topic from the heyday of one of those generations, railway safety. Yes, something of a sop to the speakers from the 1950s, but at least we were to be spared having to listen to the 1970s debaters dust off their "this house would burn the bra" speech. Besides, as I get older, I have to acknowledge that those two potential topics have switched in importance for me. Nowadays, I am much more likely to be woken from my reveries by an automated voice telling me that I have arrived in Sligo and should remember to take all my luggage with me, than by a woman giving me a gentle shake and a peck on the forehead before pointing at the still smouldering fireplace and saying diffidently, "You know the thing I was wearing last night? The thing under the sweatshirt." So, railway safety it was to be, ladies and gentlemen, and I was damn well for it. And to hell with Chorus Imper Aaron and the Minister Todd Andrews, until I was called just this afternoon by the Record Secretary, who explained that this was a philosophical debate, and who then kindly explained what a philosophical meant. It was an uncomfortable few minutes. All my student life, I had had smart chaps who had no appreciation of what debating was supposed to be about, droning on about Hobbes and Bentham and Adam Smith, no relation, David Hume, while I looked on like Homer J. Simpson, smiling at the girl in the second row. Well, not this time. No, sirree. I was going to do what the smart boys used to call empirical research. I had bought my son a Hornby Flying Scotsman 00 gauge train set for last Christmas, which I know he will love when I sort out a few legal wrinkles with my wife. I set it up in my bed set along the lines that had been explained to me patiently by the record secretary, quoting the Philippa Foot lever theory so that I could see the problem from all angles. Indeed, ladies and gentlemen, I think that I can admit in that harmless way of us railway buffs that even with the limited time at my disposal, I threw myself into it. In order to add a little colour to proceedings, I put on my old railway uniform from a Central European nation which will remain nameless, that I had purchased many years ago in London from a theatrical costumer who has now been closed down. My sound system blared out the familiar puff of the Scotsman's engines, punctuated by a whistle as it shot non-stop through Darlington. 5 of my son's toy soldiers, still in shock at being let out from their cardboard boxes for the first time, lay on one track. The 6th lay on the siding. Just to be sure that the experiment was carried out under optimum scientific conditions, I dipped the wheels of the dear old Scotsman in red paint just before shouting, "All aboard who's going aboard," dropping my little miniature green flag and setting her off on our mission. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you will appreciate that even in the short time that we've known each other, that those were anxious moments for me. Watching those 5 little British soldiers, or the Crown Forces as my dear old dad used to call them, each tied down individually, 2 of them with little droplets of sweat on them from a tea pipette I happened to have handy, while the other guy rested on the siding, looking pretty smug. A man with not a care in the world, judging by the pristine condition of his uniform, that of an unnamed Central European nation. At which point, I have to acknowledge that the lack of information about which side of the debate I was supporting became a relevant consideration. But ladies and gentlemen, I did the right thing. I didn't wait for any late-breaking news. I knew, as we all, let's face it, know, where our duty lies in such circumstances. I pulled that lever, and as I stared around the bedsit, splattered from floor to ceiling with red paint, the sound of the speakers somewhat ghostly now as they broadcast the regular chuff-chuffing of the Scotsman, even as its 1 to 200 scale relative lay on one side, scarred, an axle hanging limply at an obscene angle, the German soldier sliced raggedly in 2. I said to myself, doesn't that beat Banagher? Because I knew I had done the right thing. I asked for no praise, you understand. Indeed, to many of you, saving the lives of a net total of 4 toy soldiers probably doesn't seem like much in this crazy world. But I felt better about myself leaving that room this evening as I saluted the 5 brave little soldiers, hoping against hope that they could extricate themselves before the 5:20 from King's Cross pulled out of its station. But ladies and gentlemen, what shocked me when I, at the last minute, pulled out my 1913 Bradshaws was to find out that the person who invented this problem, Ms. Philippa Foot, although English, her maternal grandfather was Grover Cleveland, the only American president to serve 2 non-consecutive terms in office. Perhaps the most famous incident during Cleveland's tenure in office was the Pullman strike of 1894, when the railway union picketed all train companies across the states in a campaign to pressurise the carriage manufacturer Pullman to improve its employees' working conditions. In a mirror image of the problem set by Philippa Foot, the problem we have debated tonight, 2 generations later, the train had already stopped. The trains had already been stopped by the union. But her grandfather, President Cleveland, sent in the army to get the trains going again. In the course of this attempt, 30 people died. Now, is it any wonder, ladies and gentlemen, that Mrs. Foot couldn't get the train's thing out of her head? Her own grandfather's actions had contributed to the deaths of dozens on the railways. In that light, it seems very possible that Miss Foot may have wanted to work through her demons by commending action over inaction, by retrospectively putting a lever rather than a trigger in her grandfather's hands, by asking us to realise that being moral doesn't always just involve being some Fintan O'Toole type of oracle without ever actually having to take the hard decisions. But whatever her personal motives for setting this problem, and no matter how tempting it is to just walk away, our duty is clear. We must pull that lever. Thank you.
And now I call on Stephen James Barr as the last speaker for the opposition.
Mr. Chair, Madam Auditor, ladies and gentlemen of the College Historical Society, ladies and gentlemen. I would just like to commend the last speaker on when they were playing with their tree and toys, right? Because I think as a Brit, I can say for the first time, that's the first time an Irish person stood up against the Germans. Because we didn't have them in World War II, did we now? But look, I have one overarching question here, and it's a common theme throughout my speeches in the last 5 years. Are you the Leviathan? Do you get to decide who lives and dies? And not even would you be that person who does, because these guys are just essentially lied to you this entire thing, said it's our duty, it's what we should do. No, it's not what you would do, right? Because I want to pose to you a different experiment, thought experiment. Because the idea between the trolley experiment is, it's something that's very in the moment, right? Like, you have a lever, your hand is on it, do you pull it or do you not pull it? And essentially that forces you to make an action in that situation. So you can't say, oh, like it's a lot of inconvenience. Because it's still quite convenient not to exert the muscle energy to pull that. Because I wanted to make an example of someone here, but they're not currently here. But if anyone here knows Conor O'Malley, he's an MC. He's a very small little boy. Like he's like the body of like a 5-year-old child, right? And most importantly, Conor here is an organ donor. And there are thousands of people in Ireland and the UK on the organ waiting list. And if any of them were correct, and any of you believe them, what you should have done by the end of any of their speeches was taken the ballot box, went up to Conor O'Malley, and strike him on the back of the head as hard as you can so those organs can be liberated. Because just like pulling the lever, it doesn't take a lot of effort to do, right? It doesn't take a lot of effort to get those organs and extract them from Conor O'Malley. Or even since Conor's not here, Rachel is also an organ donor, so there she is. But the fact of the matter is, you won't do this. None of you will do this. None of you will actually, like, if you do, well, I'm a bit of legal trouble. But, like, it's something that requires a lot of effort for you to do, in terms of emotional effort, and you will live with for the rest of your lives, and you probably won't do. No. Because this isn't just a philosophy debate about, well, you should view things on a libertarian basis, because we don't view anything on a not libertarian basis, but utilitarian basis. Just think about it. Right now, most of you, like, many people here went out and spent money on cans which they could have donated to malaria nets. Not a lot of effort. Most people here could have organ donor cards, but they don't. It doesn't require much effort, and it would save about more than probably in net lives of, like, 2 kidneys, you have a liver, some of you have a liver, I guess, you have lungs, you have a heart. All these things can be useful for other people to continue their lives. But you don't make that it's just a small inconvenience, and you're still not bothered to actually do it. Lorna, you're working in a hedge fund at the moment, come on. The fact of the matter is, things aren't just a thought experiment because they're a thought experiment to be nice to think about. They mean real life situations that every one of you right now is in. You could leave this chamber right now and go register as an organ donor. No one's got up. So no one has actually made that effort to actually do this. Never mind going and killing 5 people because you just don't have...
If I'm willing to kill Rachel, can I win?
No. Actually, yeah, go for it.
No, that is, I will kill Rachel now if I can.
Lorna, here you go. But the fact of the matter is, she hasn't got up and struck her dad, so she's probably losing this debate as it is. Because you view this differently, right? Because even if, right, you think you would do it, but none of you would, right? That's already established. And you should do it. The fact of the matter is, those one person will live with you a lot more than 5. The fact is, no one can make a more a quantifiable difference in how their utility was affected when 9/11 happened versus with the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami in the Indian Ocean. No one really has an idea of how different that was. They want to be able to say, I was put in a situation and I didn't know how to use a train track, right? So I couldn't really act. People like that deniability and like that cushion of their life to say, well, it wasn't my fault I was in that situation. Because just like everyone here is in that right now, doing all the inactions that you're actually doing that cause people to die and will cause people to die. People, because of inactions, the people in this room will lose family members because of a lack of organ donation. You won't go out and donate a kidney to someone who's a susceptible transplant. Even if it's a very invasive thing and you know directly, it won't harm anyone but it'll save you. People like to think they're good people, but you're all just lying to yourself because you're not the person you think you are. You're not the hero that will sacrifice their life for someone else. You're not the person that will sacrifice their life to save the lives of people and all the organs you can help on that donors list. It is fine for them to say, well, you should do that. But the fact of the matter is, it's not a motion like, should you do this? It's a matter if you would. The only person who hasn't stood up here and lied to you is Oscar when he said he just wants to kill someone. That's the only honesty you've got in this debate from the opposition side. Like, for the last speaker, I remember his last speech in one of these debates, and I watched every film I could think of for trains, just like he watched the film Zulu for the 1960. And like, I just watched the Kicking in Panel 1, 2, 3, and I think it was the speed films where the train couldn't slow down below a certain speed. Didn't really tell me anything much about moral philosophy. The fact of the matter is,
strictly speaking, that's a subway car, not a train.
But they both go on rails.
Might I suggest you went for the train?
But look, the fact of the matter is, no matter what the person you think you are is not the person the person you want to be is not the person you necessarily are, because there's a lot of inconvenience in doing things. You would rather live a clear conscience and say, well, that was nothing to do with me, I had no part in that. Even if the lever is in your hand, because right now the lever is in your hand to go and register as an organ donor, to go donate blood, but many of you won't do that because of sheer inconvenience it is to your life, or to strike a racial line, for example. And finally, to sum things up, why are those people on the railways? Because I want you to think about it, right? It takes a lot of effort to get 5 people, right, and tie them up so meticulously. Like, no one here's in the Boy or Girl Scouts anymore. No one here has a tie and, well, of course runners. No one knows how to tie those knots and put those people on that railway, because maybe they really deserved it. Because you don't know what those people were like, right? Because you know right now that there are people on that waiting list who have families, etc., that are running Facebook campaigns to try and get them donors. And here you are, sat here. But the reality is that you don't know what anyone is ever like. And even if they are in the most sympathetic circumstances, you're probably going to choose an action over action because that's what you would do, not what you should do. At the end of this debate, you must face it that you probably wouldn't pull the lever because the walkway saying there was nothing to do with me is much more convenient, and no matter how sour that is to you, that is the reality that you most likely choose because it's the one that lets you live. Because you don't have to worry about that one person who died and what they could have been, where you can escape into this vacuous thing of, I don't know what those 5 people were like, because that number's a lot more hard to comprehend. Like most people would choose to do in their current lives are like, well, I could have gave blood, but I decided to go to the cinema and then go drink some pints in the pub, because it's much more convenient, it's much more valid what you would do, and you would never really feel the circumstances of your life. At the end of this debate, you're lying to yourself if you say you would side to the proposition opposed.
So I think at this stage, do the judges retire?